Here I am in my office in the midst of the pandemic, and I'm sure, like all of you, life has really changed. And in many ways, this topic seems even more timely for those on the autism spectrum who also have co-occurring mental health issues. Before I start, I just want to tell you a little bit, because some of what I'm going to be talking about is really giving you insight to my journey, as I've been working with individuals on the spectrum for close to 45 years. And so I direct the Indiana Resource Center for Autism, and started the Indiana School Mental Health Initiative because of the number of individuals that I was seeing who had co-occurring mental health issues, and who the co-occurring health issues were not being dealt with in our community very well, or as any community. I work at the Indiana Institute on Disability and Community at Indiana University, and if you're wanting more information, we have a wonderful website. We're on Pinterest, we're on Facebook, and I would encourage you to look at both the ISHMA's work and also the Indiana Resource Center for Autism work. I am a little bit newer to the mental health field, probably in the last 10 years, although have experienced it from in other ways in my life, in my world. And just like every talk, I just want you to know that there will be, you may disagree with some things. You may think that I'm off on some things, and you're welcome to. This is basically just my opinion based on a lot of years of experience. And if you have any questions about anything or don't understand something, here's my email address, and you are very welcome to email me at any time along the way. I am still learning. I don't consider myself an expert. And every time that I think that I've got all this figured out, I meet an individual who reduces me to my knees and teaches me that I still have so much more to learn. So with that said, one more thing I want to say is, although I work for a university, I'm seldom here. I spend a lot of time in the field. I'm a board certified behavior analyst, so what you will hear from me is something that has very much of a behavioral slant to it. And I spend a lot of time in the field with individuals who are having challenging behaviors from the earliest point of diagnosis until death. So we're an age span program. So I'm learning from the individuals that I interact with all the time. So here's the reality and kind of how I got here. Obviously, when there's an increasing incidence of autism spectrum disorders. The latest figures have it 1 in 59. When I started, the incidence was about 1 in 10,000. So we've seen a dramatic increase. And why that increase is happening, no one really knows. And honestly, the mission and vision and work of the Indiana Resource Center for Autism is not focused on what causes autism, but in shoring up services and making sure that individuals have access to evidence-based practices. The other thing that I was seeing as I was going into schools or into work situations, or I was getting phone calls from adults on the spectrum, is that we were seeing individuals who had increasingly more complex issues going on. So I would see individuals who, probably the record was an individual who had 14 different diagnostic labels. I'm not exactly sure how that happened, but she had 14 different labels that had been given to her by a psychiatrist. And those labels included oppositional defiant disorder, bipolar disorder, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, ADHD, anxiety disorder, depression, a whole host of things. And when I called the psychiatrist to find out how she got all these diagnoses, I think what happened is, based on what he told me, is that every time that the mother took her child into the office, she would give the doctor a rundown of new characteristics that she was seeing, and the doctor would just say, okay, based on this is what I think this label is now. So I'm seeing more kids who come to us with complex issues. The other thing that I see in our state, and I'm sure this is true in other states as well, is that I see individuals who are living increasingly more complicated lives. We have more individuals who are living in poverty. We have more individuals who are dealing with drug issues. And I know one of the questions I got was about individuals who self-medicate, and we do see that as well. We see individuals who have family members who are in jail, people who are being raised by grandparents. we know that the unemployment rate is very high for individuals on the spectrum. And so, 70% or so of our folks are living in poverty. Are unemployed or underemployed, and many are living in poverty. So, in my world, more individuals with more complex issues, living more complicated lives. And the reality is that there's not going to be any simple answer. So what I don't have for you is a recipe. I think that instead of having a recipe, we all have to have different tools, and we have to get to know every individual. If you remember, autism is referred to as a spectrum disorder because what works for one doesn't work for the next. And honestly, what works one day may not work the next day. In Indiana, we have families that have as many as 5 children on the autism spectrum. And what works for one day doesn't work for the other one the next day. And there's just, there's no simple answers for these individuals. So we also know, based on the research, that as many as 70% of individuals experience a co-occurring mental health issue. And I think probably the most common of that is anxiety, and with anxiety goes depression as well. And we also are getting an increasing number of calls from adults who are trying to untangle their diagnosis. Some of these are individuals who self-diagnose themselves with an autism spectrum disorder. Some of them are individuals who diagnose themselves with other disabilities and other diagnoses. So trying to untangle all of that is really challenging. And my first question oftentimes is what is the official diagnosis that you've received, so that I can start untangling all of this from there. And so you're going to be dealing with individuals who come to you with a whole host of issues going on. So we know the dual diagnosis. If you look at the definition of an autism spectrum disorder, nowhere in the diagnosis does it say mental retardation. In effect, those individuals who have autism spectrum disorder, we have a population of them who are very bright, and if they have some level of cognitive disability or mental retardation, that is an effective dual diagnosis. We see individuals with learning disabilities, ADHD. Obsessive compulsive sometimes is a little bit more controversial because part of the syndrome of autism is that there are obsessive behaviors. But I see individuals whose behaviors are so obsessive that they fall into another category. So I was working with a young man who, if he was going to go throw something away, he would go back and forth to the garbage can, picking it out of the garbage can, throwing it away up to 40 times before we would stop him. I think that's excessive even for individuals on the autism spectrum disorder. Again, anxiety, and for any of us who deal with individuals on the spectrum, a lot of our work is really about helping them deal with anxiety, is really about creating environments where we can minimize anxiety, is really about giving them skills so that they can deal with their anxiety. We see individuals who have Tourette's, Fragile X, yes, Down syndrome and autism, cerebral palsy. In our state, we're seeing in our school for the deaf and our school for the visually impaired, a growing population of individuals who also have an autism spectrum disorder. So in many ways, they have a dual sensory impairment, and that is a growing population. We also see many of our individuals who have epilepsy, and probably a larger population than of the normal population have epilepsy. And that those can be either extreme seizures, or they can be kind of where individuals blank out for a period of time. We see individuals who have bipolar and who also have an autism spectrum disorder, who have impulse control issues. With bipolar, and in one of the previous DSMs, they used to say that a diagnosis of schizophrenia would supersede a diagnosis of an autism spectrum disorder. And I don't know that I was always really clear about that. I'm not a diagnostician, I'm an educator. But here's what I understand from a practical perspective of interacting with folks. When I have an individual who both has a diagnosis of an autism spectrum disorder and bipolar, many of the strategies that we use in autism, social stories, which are fabulous, and social thinking, the incredible 5-point scale, many of the strategies that we use for kids on the autism spectrum are not going to be enough to help our folks who have extreme bipolar. I'm not going to be talking about medication, and in some of those situations, those individuals need medication. I will talk a little bit about the issues that we're having in our state with individuals with medication. So I think it's really important, if you're interacting with these folks, to understand their characteristics and how they interact with the world and understand their perspective and things. And I think that's one of the interesting things as I've been spending time on the phone with individuals on the spectrum during the pandemic. I realize that their thinking is oftentimes very different than mine. And so the reasoning that I have to go through is very different. I have many friends on the autism spectrum. Through the years, I've learned a lot from interacting with them and understanding that autism is a neurological disorder. It is not, it's manifested behaviorally, but is a neurological disorder. And so that means how these individuals understand and interpret and interact with the world is going to be very different than you and I. If you've ever been around somebody who has dementia or some kind of a traumatic brain injury, you know what I mean when I say that there's just something that's different about the essence of them. So in terms of intelligence, what you will see is individuals who have a cognitive disability, and then you see a population of individuals who are really bright. And we have folks in the state who are incredibly gifted and have incredibly high IQs, but still are challenged by many things. And I think that you have to understand that that IQ doesn't always translate into a usable career. And so that IQ will help us understand, and we can build upon the strength, but understand that people fall all on that spectrum. We see that individuals who have a range of social difficulties, and I think the old stigma is that individuals prefer to be alone. I know that some of my friends on the spectrum prefer to be alone. One of my dear friends used to say that in a perfect world, she would have 2 friends, and that would be so that she could call on one of them if she needed them, and the rest of the time they could keep each other company. And then we have a population of individuals who feel socially isolated, who really want to have relationships. They want to date, and they don't know how to date. They don't know how to approach the opposite sex or the same sex, because we do see individuals who have different sexual preferences and different gender identities in the autism community. And it's not only just obtaining those relationships, but then it's how do I maintain that relationship. So there's a young man that I've been working with for years who he wants a girlfriend more than anything in this world. And he will go to all kinds of extreme means to get a girlfriend, including bankrupting himself. And so then when he gets a girlfriend, what oftentimes happens is that he will text them multiple times or email them multiple times, so much so that it is like a stalking, and then people run away from him. So we have the social difficulties all along the range. Our folks don't understand social innuendos. They don't understand the social rules. And folks on the spectrum are very rule bound. So in every situation, they're looking for the black and white in situation. They're looking for the rules in situations. And you know that in society, especially when we're dealing with social issues, that there's not only the black and white rules, but there's also kind of the hidden rules. There's not only the policy rules, but there's the hidden rules. Like at my office, when I have people here, what happens is that we have a refrigerator, and anybody can use the refrigerator. But the unwritten rule is that there's areas of the refrigerator that are reserved for certain staff. And if you violate that rule, you endanger your reputation here. Not very seriously, but we notice it. You'll also see expressive and receptive communication difficulties. So how individuals process the world, how they take things in. So one of the things that you'll see is like if individuals are given directions as a big group, they may not understand that those directions apply to them also. You'll also see that individuals will oftentimes process information much more slowly than is typical. I have a friend who it takes her 15 seconds to process a question. And if you think about that, that's a really long time. And so what happens is that people will ask her that question over and over again, which only serves to frustrate her. You'll see our individuals who, some of them are nonverbal, and then some of our individuals are highly verbal. And even for our individuals who are highly verbal, they still may lack that pragmatic communication ability. So that ability to tell us what they're really thinking and feeling in situations. So it's very hard for them to articulate their emotions to us as well. So that expressive challenge is great. And then we have individuals who engage in what's called echolalia. Those are individuals who either will repeat things that they've heard from other people or from TV or from movies. And one of the difficulties that we have with those individuals who have echolalia is is that sometimes they will repeat things that they've heard from violent TV shows or from watching violent video games. So one of the things that I tell families is really be careful what your child is watching, because they may repeat those words. You also see that individuals develop a restricted repertoire of activities and interest, and they will develop special interests, and those special interests can be used to help guide decisions around all kinds of programming in their life. And it can also help to build rapport with the individual if you understand that interest. Now, some of the interests are a little extreme and it may be hard, but I have friends, for example, who really understand about the weather, or understand a lot about movie credits, or could help me pick out refrigerators, or could help me pick out ceiling fans. And so thinking about how you build on those restrictive repertoires, so people become very interested in topics. They talk about them as fascinations in the world of the neurotypical world, which, by the way, we all have labels. People on the spectrum call us neurotypicals, and they don't understand why we act the way we do. So you have to understand that there's oftentimes a disconnect between our world and their world. And so, but our individuals think that, you know, their fascinations are incredible. And some of them develop very successful careers based on those fascinations. You'll also see a weak central coherence. So that means that individuals will have a hard time kind of seeing the big picture of things. So, for example, if an individual walks into a room that has a computer in it, and they're highly fascinated with computers, they may be oblivious to the fact that there's 5 people sitting around that computer and trying to attend to it, and they may start asking questions about the computer or playing with the computer. You also see some additional considerations. Again, I talked about seizures, medications that our folks take, and I think, you know, medicating someone on the spectrum is complicated. And we in Indiana, you'll see later on, I'm going to talk about that. One of the issues we have in our state is a lack of psychiatrists. And we definitely have a lack of psychiatrists who have an understanding of both autism spectrum disorders and mental health issues as well. So, you know, we sometimes will see individuals who are on a lot of different medications. More is not always better. And so medicating somebody on the spectrum is really an art form. And so it's complicated, it's complex. And I have learned to stay in my lane because I'm not a physician, and so I'm not going to talk about medications. You'll see individuals who will have difficulties with sleep. You'll see some of our individuals who have gastrointestinal issues. You'll see some of our individuals who will develop pica. That means that they will eat non-edibles. So there's a whole host of things that go along with having an autism spectrum diagnosis. And probably the one that is the most common and that people talk about the most is behavior. And so I want you to understand, because I'm going to be talking about behavior, but I think about behavior very broadly. I don't think about behavior in terms of negative behaviors or adverse behaviors or problematic behaviors. Right now, I'm engaging in the behavior of sitting. Right now, I'm engaging in the behavior of talking to you. Right now, you're engaging in the behavior of listening. So I think about behaviors very broadly when I talk about behaviors, just so that you kind of have that understanding. So the other thing that, as I got into this, we started in our state, we started looking at the ACEs questionnaire, and I'm sure that you all know that, and the research that goes along with it, that really talks about that there is a connection oftentimes between the physical health of people and the mental health and the things that have happened in an individual's life. It's a checklist that will give you some insight into some of the things that may be kind of problematic for our folks. But we also know that our individuals on the spectrum, and especially our women on the spectrum, talk about this, is that they are a greater chance of neglect, they're a greater risk of physical abuse, and they are also a greater risk of sexual abuse as well. Also, I have many female friends on the spectrum, and they will talk about through the years that they've had physical or sexual abuse. And because they didn't understand the signs or the intentions of the male that was approaching them. And so that needs to be part of programming for our folks. And so some of the common characteristics, and I have to tell you that as someone who works in the field with a lot of folks, I find it interesting when I see individuals who live in very chaotic environments who seem to want to stay in those chaotic environments, or go back to those abusive situations. And it's not only just due to the limited availability of accessible transportation and abuse shelters, but it may be other things as well. There may be kind of a codependency that's developed. We also notice that our folks are taught to be compliant and passive as a result of this. And I was just reading a book by Brene Brown, and she had a wonderful line in the book about how when people grow up living on eggshells, the trauma, when they never know how an individual is going to be when they interact with them. And so if they have a parent who has mental health issues and so is one day manic, the other day is depressive, one day angry, and the other day not, what you will see is that individuals will have that becomes a trauma experience for the individual. So we have to understand that the individuals that we interact with are more than just them. It's the whole upbringing. It's everything that they learned through the years. And through that, they may be compliant and passive and not have the tools to really deal with it. Also, when they're dealing with individuals who have those mental health issues, they may be threatened or coerced by the withholding of needed care. Our folks become very dependent on individuals. And I've also seen individuals become socially isolated. I will also tell you that as I've been talking to individuals on the spectrum, adults who have mental health issues and also an autism spectrum disorder, oftentimes they are very socially isolated. They reduce their world. They keep reducing their world so that it becomes more and more manageable for them. We also know that these are individuals that may rely upon others for assistance with the most intimate of personal hygiene activities. And as a result of that, there's more opportunity for perpetrators. And one of the saddest things that's part of my job is that I at times get called in to provide expert testimony or expert insight into different situations where individuals are sexually abused by someone who thinks that that individual is the perfect target. And so we have to realize and make sure that our individuals are closely protected, especially for those individuals with the most significant disabilities who are the most vulnerable to that. So, we have to understand the potential for and the role of trauma, so what ACEs says to us about the role of trauma. But I think we also have to think about the natural role of stress. And so there is a book that I've been reading that I love, and the author is Stuart Shankar. Some of you may have read it. It's called Self-Reg. And it's really powerful. It's not autism specific, it's mental health specific, but it really talks about some of these issues that we see with a lot of folks and on the autism spectrum. So we know that sensory stress can cause trauma for our folks. The stressor of demands that's placed on them and the stressor of the various characteristics of ASD. They also could be caused by bullying. Some of our individuals are bullied. And just so you know, some of our folks do not understand the difference between being teased and bullied, and they may have to be intentionally taught that difference. That they may be traumatized by previous experiences that they've had, even back into the school years. And a behavior approach is used, time out, restraint. If they've had any kind of aversive strategies that have been used with them, that may cause trauma for them. I've had friends on the spectrum who have talked to me about that the strategies that were used with them when they were younger have caused some trauma for them. Also, staff, professional, and family interactions can cause trauma for individuals. One of the things that, when I go into schools that I tell people is do not talk about the individual in front of them. And there are times where I will go into schools and adult programs where an individual will start talking very negatively about individuals. And just because the individual may not be able to talk, that doesn't mean that they can't hear. So I think it really is incumbent upon us, and I'm going to talk about this later, that we are very positive with individuals when we interact with them. And that doesn't mean that we don't support them and that we're not honest, because people on the spectrum want our honesty, but I think that how we approach it, we have to do it in a very kind and calm way. Or there may be events that have happened in the community with individuals that have really created some trauma for them. We also have to see it through the lens of the individual, because again, they are seeing everything through the lens of an autism spectrum disorder. So how they process and interpret that information is going to be very different than you and I, so we have to see it through the lens of them. And we also know that when individuals, from the neuroscience literature, we know that when individuals are in constant stress, It raises cortisol levels. We have an incredible professional here in Indiana who has become our Pied Piper, who has helped really shift the mindset of a lot of people in our schools and our communities. Lori Desital, and if you want more information about her, she does great work around the neuroscience. And what we know is that when individuals are in stress, so how the example that is used by many of my colleagues is that if you think about going into the woods and you come across a bear and you're frightened by that bear, for some of our individuals on the spectrum, they are always facing the bear. Okay, so we have to realize that they're always in that heightened state. So when they're in that high level of cortisol, it changes your neurology. For all of us, we know that when we are in continual stress, that it changes our neurology. It changes our ability to cope. It changes the way that we interact with people. It changes our health, you know? And so we have to take this very seriously. And it makes rational thinking more difficult, and reactivity becomes much more prevalent for our folks. So you also need to know that not everybody exhibits trauma the same way. Some exhibit trauma outwardly, and others become introverted and depressed. So, you know, the individual who is socially isolated may be experiencing trauma the same way that someone is who is very outwardly aggressive in the community. So again, I'm going to keep talking on this theme of anxiety because it is major for our folks. I just want to talk about resilience for a second, because one of the things, I am primarily an educator, and I was a teacher for many years. And as a teacher, I always felt that my job was to prepare individuals for life. And I know this may not be the politically correct response, but it was not to prepare them for statewide tests of achievement, but it was really to protect them for life and I mean, prepare them for life. And so one of the things that I have realized, and I think that this pandemic has really pointed this out to me, is the importance of resilience for our folks. You know, we know that there's poor outcome data for our individuals, the high unemployment rate. And so I'm going to try to give you examples, and I use stories for me, it helps me illustrate. So when we look at individuals on the spectrum, oftentimes people talk about a continuum from those and how we interact with folks. And in terms of, for some individuals, we need to, some people will look at our folks and say, we need to assimilate. You know, we need to expect them to assimilate, to be like everybody else. And the term that's used is we need them to be normal and act like everybody else. And one individual on the spectrum said normal was the second button on the wash machine. I don't know what normal is. The campus at IU is normally 48,000 students. I have no idea what normal is on a campus this large. And then on the other hand, we have individuals who think that our job is to totally accommodate the person. So they have autism, and we have to accommodate them in every way. So to the extreme, I will see parents who will buy new clothes for their child every time their child doesn't like the clothes that they bought. I will see parents who will cook special meals, or who will turn TV channels, or who will leave places because of their child. And I think, you know, we all have to accommodate and choose our battle. So I want to be very careful in how I'm saying this. But what I tell people in our state is that I think that we have to sometimes push our folks to a little discomfort, always with the safety net under them. You know, so we talk about reasonable risk, but we have to give them a little bit of discomfort, and so that they can be in society more. I mean, the reality of it is, if you're going to have a job or if you're going to live in the community, they're not going to be overly accommodating you. We all accommodate to a certain degree, but I think that we're going to have to be very careful. And you really, if you misunderstand that, please, please, please email me, because I know that sometimes it's hard for me to articulate that, and especially when I'm talking to a screen. We also have to teach individuals that they're not always going to be first in line. They're not always going to win. You know, my grandchildren, when they were younger, they belonged to 4-H, and everyone would get a ribbon. And I know I was really concerned about that, because it gave, especially my grandson, some idea that every time he would win. And when he got to the point where he started losing, it was really hard for him. And I think for all of us, you know, what I know is that we learn from our failure. you know, that we learn how to deal with failure when things are important, you know. And so, you know, I know that this makes many of us uncomfortable to think about setting a person up for a little bit of failure. I think about Temple Grandin has been my friend for many decades, and her mother, Eustacia, is an incredible woman. And really, if you want to understand a success story, and I know that Temple doesn't reflect everyone in the autism community, but there were many lessons that I learned from Eustacia along the way. And one of the things is that when there were things that Temple did not want to do, Eustacia would bargain with Temple to try it for a couple weeks. And after that couple weeks, she was still wanting to leave the situation or the event or stop trying it, then she was allowed to, but she always had to try something. And I think with all of our folks, we have to think about what are the long-term outcomes with individuals. So all of these realities started to change how I looked at behavior. And I think, you know, here we started talking about behavior not as problematic behavior, but as stress behavior. And I already talked about my broad definition of behavior a little bit. So, excuse me. If behavior is an issue, remember that behavior is an issue of underlying conditions. And too often we treat symptoms. And the symptoms are hitting, when they withdraw, put their heads down the desk, or they isolate themselves at home. So I'm going to give you kind of the medical comparison. I have inherited a Greek mother who is 92 years old now. And probably about 10 years ago, she started losing weight, started having chronic diarrhea, started having chronic headaches. Went to one doctor and said, you need to start, we're going to give you medicine for the headaches. Went to another doctor and said, we're going to give you medicine for your diarrhea. Went to another doctor and said, you know, they said something else about gaining weight. Finally went to a doctor who said, we need to figure out what's going on. Found out that she had lymphoma, had the kind of lymphoma that if you remove the spleen, it throws you into remission. And so 10 years later now, she has been able to see the marriage of 2 of her granddaughters, and soon 3, and the birth of 4 great-grandchildren. And it was all because there was a doctor who just simply did not look at the symptoms, but looked at the larger picture, looked at the underlying conditions. And again, too often we just treat those symptoms. How do we get rid of the hitting? How do we get rid of this behavior? And I have to know individual stories in order to figure out what's going on. So up front, I'm just going to say this to you, is that, you know, in schools especially, but this may be something that you need to think about with some of your adults, is that when you have individuals who are kind of then in that crisis mode, and where they're having some extremes of behavioral situations, I like to think about it not as crisis management, but as a de-escalation plan. Because I think, you know, while it is important that people have gone through CPI training, or they have some crisis prevention responses, the ultimate goal is really how do we de-escalate the individual. And so when the individual is upset, when they are escalating, one of the worst things that you can do is to start lecturing them. And so, you know, we have to stay calm. And I know as I interact with individuals in the community, and I'm dealing with somebody who is having a behavior issue and maybe even aggressing against me, I have a tendency to stay very calm and in many ways just emotionally remove myself. And part of that is also that I know that if I engage emotionally, that it will escalate the behavior again. So when an individual is upset, don't get into a lot of verbalizations with them, don't approach quickly. The goal is really to help them de-escalate, and if possible, catch the behavior before it escalates out of control. Through the years, I've worked with a lot of individuals who you can see an escalation cycle in their behavior. Brenda Miles does some really nice work around rage, the levels of rage, and that individuals start out with calm, and then they go up to like full-blown behavior, and then they come down off of that. So understand kind of that escalation cycle, and if you could interact early on, realize that our reaction, how we respond, is going to either make the situation worse or better, okay? And I think this is what's really hard, and it's an important theme. And again, as a teacher, this was really hard for me to think about. And as I'm interacting with all kinds of individuals, is that I play a role in their reaction, you know? And I'm sure for those of you who are counselors, you already realize that. And not getting into power struggles. I also really focus on self-management, and my goal is not to control somebody, but to give somebody the skills to be able to manage their own behaviors. And interestingly, when started getting into the world of mental health, I started asking questions about the strategies that were being used in mental health, not autism, but in mental health. And so people would say things to me about zones of regulation and the incredible 5-point scale. Those are strategies that come out of the autism community that are really successful with our folks. And we also see that we have situations with individuals who have really extreme needs, and they may need hospitalization and medication management. The difficulty that I want us to be aware of is that if individuals need to be hospitalized, or if they need to go into a clinical setting, there always has to be some kind of a transition plan. Because what we know, if you look at the addiction literature or any kind of literature, is that if you take somebody and you put them in a clinical setting and you get things better for them, and then you plop them right back into the old environment that they came from, that those issues will reoccur. So a transition planning for that is really critical, and we have people in our state working on that transition planning process. So here's just an example of an incredible 5-point scale that I used with a young man. And I had him work with me on putting this together. I don't remember what he assigned to all the numbers, but I'll just kind of give you a brief overview. And by the way, on our website, we have visual supports all for free. And you're welcome to download them. So 1 was I'm calm and I can keep working. 3 was I'm feeling anxious and I need to leave the room. And 5 was if you got up to 5, we knew that we needed to clear the classroom. So he would move the paper clip up and down. And then for each of those numbers, we had strategies that teachers could put in place. And that was really helpful. And it also told the staff what they needed to be doing when the escalation happened. So as we identify the problematic behaviors, we have to operationally define and identify all the behaviors of concern. And too often what I see is that people will use judgmental terms like this person is non-compliant, or they're angry all the time. And by the way, I've never met an individual who always engages in behavior. They always have times where they are not. And so what we know is that the more objective we can be, the more we can give measurable terms for behavior. So angry throws items across the room. Non-compliant says no when asked to do, given a direction, so that we all can reach consensus about what that behavior looks like. Because if we're subjective about it, it's harder to take data. We have to start with an objective baseline with the individual. So, and I think that the more objective it is, the easier it's going to be to get to the heart of the issue. We also know in life that antecedents are events that happen before the behavior. And we see 2 different kinds of antecedents, slow triggers and fast triggers. And so again, what we want to do is to look at the entire individual and their whole life, not just what we see in front of us. And so in many ways, when I look at behavior, we talk about what comes right before the antecedent, the behavior, and then the consequence. And I think that the antecedent that is even more important are the setting events. So this morning I got up and my internet connection isn't great at home. And so it's okay, but I had to come in the office, okay? And I haven't been coming into the office. And so I came into the office and started setting up this Zoom meeting, and realized, because I'm using Florida's technology, that I don't have the same technology expertise that I would need for Florida. So I had to contact people. That could have caused me, all of those things could have caused me some anxiety. So that when I started this webinar, which I think I did have a little bit of anxiety, what you see is that I may not be able to perform as well. So we all have issues that we bring to the table. So with our individuals, these are conditions that are going to increase the likelihood that behavior is going to occur. So those include, again, anxiety, biological issues. I oftentimes will ask people about their diet. I will ask people about their gastrointestinal issues, if they have reflux, if they have any kind of sinus headaches or migraines, allergies. I try to get a sense of the wellness of the individual. You also see the trauma in the individual's life to understand that. Schedule changes. I can't even imagine what many parents are dealing with right now with their children at home, and that their whole schedule has been disrupted. Now, I know some kids may be doing better, but some kids I think are probably really struggling with this. We also know that when there's staff changes in our adult services, we see a high turnover of direct service personnel, which can make a difference for individuals. Medications that are changed or missed can make a difference. Irregular sleep patterns when individuals are not sleeping well. Illness or impending illness. So often as an educator, I would have a student who would have behavior difficulties, and then a couple days later would become ill. We also see that missed meals can have an impact on the individual. Arguments or fights with classmates, parents, teachers, spouses. And this is the one that I want you to highlight, because this is the one that is the most important to me: skill deficits. We know that the only way to teach individuals in the long term is to give them different skills. Ross Green, who is a brilliant behavior person, brilliant person. I really have brought Ross into the state several times. He has this adage of, if students knew better, they would do better. Okay, and so at the heart of behavior is oftentimes a skill deficit, and that's going to be a theme that we talk about a lot. Home conditions, and by that I don't mean that the parents are bad. What I mean is that there may be economic challenges. Right now, the high unemployment rate, there's going to be a lot of home conditions that are affecting kids. There could be divorce or death in the family. I know one of the articles on our website is about loss, how individuals on the spectrum can deal with loss, whether it's through divorce or individuals dying. So, and understand that when there is an individual in the spectrum in the household, there's more stress on the family oftentimes. So, and then past and current experiences for the individual. And then we see the immediate antecedents. And those are things like the individual being teased or bullied or feeling socially isolated. There may be specific types of tasks or activities or certain noises that the individual may set them off. And sometimes those noises are really hard for us to hear. For example, I was at a conference one time and this parent came up and said, my child has a hard time going through the grocery line. Fortunately, I was standing there with a friend of mine who is on the spectrum, and she said, you know, you may not hear it, but when groceries are scanned across the scanner, there's a noise that many of us hear that is really hurts our ears. So sometimes those noises are undetectable to us as well. Too much or too little unstructured time can be difficult. Transitions or changes are complex for our folks. There may be certain people that trigger our folks, and it may just be the demeanor, it may be how they talk to the individual, it may be the relationship they don't have, and then there may be certain requests that will trigger our individuals. I'm going to talk about consequences because too often, I know, especially in education, and I see this also in adult services sometimes, we want to focus on the consequence, you know. And so from a behavioral perspective, the only definition of consequence is that it follows a response. It doesn't necessarily mean anything punitive or punishment. It just means that it follows a response, antecedent, behavior, consequence. It can be a reinforcement. So a reinforcement is the individual does something good, we praise them, or we give them something, or we pay them, or whatever it is, we reinforce them. And that increases the likelihood, if the reinforcer is really meaningful to them, it increases the likelihood that that behavior will occur again. Punishment is if the individual does something that we want them to decrease doing. We remove attention, we remove an activity, we remove technology, or we remove them from a situation, and with the hope that it will decrease their behavior. What you have to understand is that each of us are reinforced and punished by different things. And I apologize for using the school analogy, but I see in schools that there are individuals who are actually reinforced by suspension and expulsion. They go to school and they don't feel successful, and so they get to go home and they get to play video games. So you have to understand reinforcement and punishment from the individual's perspective. For some of our individuals, you know, being fired from a job that they don't like and being able to go home wouldn't be a bad thing to them. So the question is that when individuals engage in behavior, they're getting something from it. What is the payoff? What's maintaining the behavior? And it may not make sense to us, so we have to see it again through their lens to figure out what's going on from their perspective. So we do a lot of indirect assessment methods. We ask a lot of questions. We have rating scales and behavior checklists. Sometimes I will do learning styles inventory to see how individuals learn. I will look at all the comprehensive evaluations. I may, and I'm not looking at this as a screening tool. I think I use this sometimes just to help people understand a child's life. and understand the impact that a child's upbringing can have on them. And so we try to educate individuals about ACEs. We've worked a lot with around the state of Indiana to train people on the ACEs. And then out of Ross Green's work, we use the lagging skills inventory. And that just helps us to really see some of the skill deficits in individuals. And then on the other hand of that, the ziggurat, which was developed by Barry Grossman and Ruth Aspey, I will use the ziggurat strengths and skills inventory. And some of that is to just really change the conversation and to really get people thinking about the strengths and skills of individuals. Because I will tell you that if we can understand those, I can, based on that strengths and skills inventory, I'm oftentimes able to put together a really strong program. And then we will do record reviews, and I'll talk about that a little bit. So you'd all ask questions about the behavior. When did the behavior first happen? Has it persisted across grade levels and settings and through their age? Has the behavior improved over the years? What's been effective with the individual? What's been effective? What's the history of it? How did we get to this place? But on the other hand, the questions that actually help me a lot are, under what conditions does the individual do well? As a behaviorist who goes into situations to see an individual who is having behavioral problems, I will tell you that it is not unusual for my staff and I to go into a situation and for the individual to be doing really well. And then it upsets people because they're trying to convince me that, yes, this individual can throw desks across the room. Yes, they can throw tasks across the room. And I believe that if somebody calls me in to see a behavior, I believe that the behavior is happening. But if I can see and if I can determine those conditions under which the individual is the most successful, those that they can do the best, then I can start developing a program that really builds upon those qualities of the environment and of the interactions and of the situation and of the tasks. And that helps me with creating a program. So I get a lot of information from that. I think it's also really important to understand what are the strengths and interests of the individual, to know what they like to do. We have to understand, and for all of us, I mean, we make connections based on our strengths and interests. And I hope that you all went into your careers because it was a strength and interest of yours and not because it was your weakness. And I think we become too weakness focused with our individuals. And are those strengths being used for programming? And I think the other thing is that we have to make sure that individuals have an opportunity to feel successful every day. You know, some of the individuals that I've worked with have never had the chance to feel successful. And I'm going to tell you a story about this later on, but I really want you to hold on to that idea because I'm going to come back to that as well. I look at the settings, you know, what are the aspects of these settings that are less and more successful for the individual, the space, the noise, the proximity to others, the organization of space, you know, what is it about this environment that is difficult? What is their day like? You know, are there extensive periods of downtime? Are they just sitting isolated? Are they overly engaged? Are they under engaged? What are they doing that's really productive for them? Are there certain times of the day that are more problematic? Is that related to medication cycles? Is it related to all of us have times of the day that were more or less successful? So, you know, what are the times of the day that are more difficult? Are there specific activities or courses in which the individual is more or less likely to engage in the behavior? Are there specific staff, adults, instructors? And what are the characteristics of those individuals that help the individual be more successful? And again, going back to what are the skills that the individual has to be able to respond in a situation appropriately. You know, we can't just say that we expect you to behave this way and not give them the tools. Okay, and that's again a theme that I'm going to build on. Does the behavior serve a purpose for the individual? We know that individuals engage in behavior because they either get something or they get away from something. It can fulfill something for them sensory-wise, and we know that many of our individuals have sensory issues. Even individuals who engage in self-injurious behavior, there may be a sensory basis for that self-injurious behavior. So we have to look at the sensory basis. But what are they getting from the behavior? And then what is the individual's primary means of communication? There is a very tight link between behavior and communication. And even when an individual is highly verbal, they still may not be able to tell us what they're thinking and feeling. I mean, and that's true for a lot of us, let's face it. You know, if we all communicated well, there wouldn't be a need for so many talk shows like Dr. Phil and stuff. So we know that communication can be difficult for our folks. So, and again, when you communicate with individuals on the spectrum who are higher functioning, know that they are very concrete. They have difficulties with abstract ideas. The more concrete and fact-based that you can be, the easier it's going to be for them to understand. Does the individual have any medical problems? Is there anything health-wise going on, or do they take any medications, and what are those medications, and what are the side effects, and could these be affecting the behavior? And is there a possibility of substance abuse? We will see individuals who self-medicate. And I will be honest with you, I don't know that there is an autism approach to individuals who have substance abuse issues. I think they're probably the same strategies as other folks. It's just understanding the kind of the lens that they look through it. But again, I think you have to go through to the heart of the matter about why do they feel the need to self-medicate. I know that when CBD oil first came out, and it wasn't legal in a lot of states, and I don't think it is still legal in some states, but I know some individuals were using CBD oil and really noticed that helped to decrease their anxiety as well. So, if they are engaging in substance abuse, we have to think about what is that underlying reason for it. Does the individual have difficulty with sleep or with eating? What's their nutritional? How are they eating? Are their nutritional needs being met? It's interesting during this pandemic, looking at watching TV, and I'm trying to minimize my news watching. But what you will see is that people talk about the importance of having a healthy diet, and I know that if my diet isn't as healthy, that I don't feel as good. We also know that we have to look at what the individual's life is like. And, do they have the opportunity to engage in a range of opportunities outside of life? What is the quality of life like? And, Ted Carr, bless his heart, gone too soon, did a lot of work, and he was a dear friend and colleague, talked a lot about the importance of quality of life. And I remember going to a conference one time, and Ted was presenting to thousands of people. And he stood up there in a very unassuming way, which was his manner. And he said, what I've come to realize is that the happier people are, the better they behave. And so we also have to understand something about the individual's quality of life and giving people opportunities. And then again, are there conditions inside the home which may be troubling the individual? And again, not bad parenting. Too often we want to lay blame on family members, but are there stresses in the home which are causing problems? And sometimes we know that families and individuals are going to need help from outside agencies. In Indiana, we have something called systems of care. And the goal of systems of care is really to kind of wrap services around the individual, and as communities to come together and to figure out how to bring together our faith-based community, our mental health community, our law enforcement community, how to bring all of our community providers together and look at the community holistically. But I know some of these things just go beyond what any school, what any family, what any agency can do. Sometimes we really need to reach out and really pull people together around these individuals. So I will also look at records, medical records, IEPs, IHPs, IPPs, whatever, ITPs, whatever Ps you have, I will look at them. I look at previous behavior support plans that have been used with individuals, and you know that the number one reason that behavior support plans or any plan doesn't work is because that's not followed. Psychological assessments, previous interventions. I'll look at anecdotal records, although those are less effective to look at when people just journal about all their concerns. Those are less effective than actually hard data. And then I may do some direct method for gathering information. We also may need to ask people to collect data for the individual. And I collect data sometimes around frequency, so how often it happens, duration, how long it lasts, or intensity, how extreme it is. And sometimes we will collect data around all three of those. So I had a young man that I was working with who had a high frequency behavior that lasted a long time and was incredibly intense. And we used the scatter plot to collect data around, and a scatter plot is an evidence-based tool. If you need access to it, I would be happy to share it with Florida. You can probably find it on the internet. But we keep the scatter plot to take data on frequency, duration, and intensity. And what was good is that the frequency did not go down, the duration did, and the intensity did, so that we could see that there really was progress being made, and then could make instructional decisions based on that. So this is just an example of a scatter plot for a young man named Mike, who would curse, stare at peers, and make loud noises. He had a co-occurring mental health issue and ASD. Okay, and the key, because this was a low frequency behavior, was that it happened one time. We did a slash mark 2 to 5 times, an X mark more than 5 times, colored in the box. And this is the data we came up with. Okay, so then based on that data, then we have to go back in and say, okay, why was day 3 really good? What happened on day 3? What was going on during PE and lunch? And for me, I will tell you also the questions that I was asking about, what went on with science? Because what I found out is that when individuals have a couple bad experiences, a couple bad class periods, it's oftentimes more difficult for them to regroup. So something magical must be happening in science, which it was. So as you are assessing behavior, make sure to listen to the, it should say person, even if they cannot talk. You know, I have worked with individuals who were highly verbal and individuals who are nonverbal. And if I listened carefully to each of them, they were telling me something that was going on with their life. Okay. Probably I worked with an individual as a teacher who was a very large kid, who engaged in a lot of self-injurious behavior. And over time, what I realized is that that self-injurious behavior was the need for pressure. Okay, and once we built in some pressure into his life, the self-injurious behavior decreased. He did not tell me that, but by listening to the behavior, I could tell that. So I really look at what people's behaviors are telling me. And actually, I have to tell you, even for those who can communicate, I look at nonverbal behavior. I look at facial expressions to tell me what that's telling me about the individual. I think we have to really listen to the family and to the parents, you know, and understand their life stories. And, you know, I will be honest, sometimes we are dealing with children who have family members who are also on the spectrum as well. And they will need some help with kind of navigating. And in some situations, they are really much more proficient at dealing with their child because of their own issues. And then as we're interacting with family members and parents, we also have to understand their competing demands on their time. And then know in situations what we can or cannot control. And I say this because sometimes I will hear from people, well, I can't change this because the family is so dysfunctional. Well, you know, we all have dysfunction in our family, you know, and I have a wonderful family. If any of them ever see this, they have a wonderful family, but we all have some dysfunction in our family, and they would admit that too. And, you know, people come to their jobs and to their life situations and to your counseling with the stuff that they come with. And there's some things you can control and there's some things that you cannot. And I think the wisdom is knowing what we can and cannot control. And then again, addressing the whole child, looking at them from a biological basis, an emotional basis, a learning basis, a social basis, and from the whole family situation. So this is, you know, I gather information. I gather a lot of information about individuals, and then I put it into a grid. And this was used with a young man on the spectrum who also had mental health issues. I was called in to see him because he was having behavioral issues at home. And I will tell you in all honesty, when I walked into the classroom, the teacher was saying very negative things about him. And I will tell you about his story a little bit more. So the problem behavior was that he would pinch, he would yell, he would scream, he would kick, and he would hit. All of those, we would know those if we saw it. The setting events were that he had autism and anxiety. He took some medications, he had allergies. He was highly verbal, but he still could not tell us what he was thinking and feeling. He had sensory challenges, and so he would wear a band around his wrist that would help him. He lacked self-regulation and self-management skills. He also had poor social skills. He had a difficult time interacting with classmates, as bright as he was. He was kind of like the Big Bang Theory. He was kind of like a little Sheldon. He had, because of life circumstances, he had frequent school changes. And he had some experiences in schools that were very negative. He had trauma and home stability. He had a family member who was out of the house. And so that presented him with some home instability. So the triggered antecedents for him were if he had certain demands, if there was too much talking from staff, transitions, leaving the school bus was sometimes difficult, changes in routine, certain academic work, if there was too much paperwork and if he was being read to or lectured to. And we know that many individuals have a hard time with paper and pencil activities. What he got out of it, what he got out of his behavior, what he achieved through his behavior, it had power for him because he was able to end an activity. He gained access to a desired event and activity, which is that he was left alone, told to go to his desk and put his head down, which he preferred than interacting with a teacher who said negative things about him. He got some attention from staff who liked him, who wanted to calm him and make sure he was okay. And then he also got some sensory needs met from that. And then underneath that, I also will put strengths and skills. And so for him, he had great rote memorization. He had learned routines. He showed interest in classmates. He had strong relationships with certain staff. When interested, he could focus on an activity for extended periods, and he liked to help. When I walked in, he was standing in front of a board and he was writing down comments. Was doing mathematical calculations, unbelievable hard mathematical calculations that were way beyond me. So I know that one of the questions that I get oftentimes is about the use of cognitive behavior therapy or talk therapy with our individuals. And again, these are just generalizations. Every individual's different. And you may find individuals for whom cognitive behavior therapy or various versions of it are highly effective. I know that in our community mental health centers that some of our folks are seeing that the talk therapy is not as effective with our folks because of their processing difficulties. And again, you have to understand how these individuals process, that they're, shouldn't say fact-based, literal difficulties with abstract ideas. And so many of our community mental health centers are now taking kind of a skill-based approach where they're really looking with the skill deficits and building skills around self-management, emotional regulation, and other strategies. The other thing that I see is, autism, when you took a disability that went from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 59 now, what you saw is that autism became a business. And a lot of what we did here at Indiana Resource Center for Autism is that we tried to hook people up with research-based practices. Because there were a lot of things out there that were a little wacky. You're seeing that with this pandemic as well. I mean, it just is the nature of the beast of all of us. Is as people are looking for answers, folks are willing to color way outside the box or the line sometimes with looking at things for our folks. And what I see now is that there's lots of things happening in the world of mental health. It's become a business also, and I guess I'm part of that business. But you see individuals who are coming up with all different kinds of approaches in the business of mental health. Unfortunately, what I don't see in mental health, and we actually work with the National Center on School Mental Health out of Baltimore, and they're a really great resource for folks, is that we see that there is a really good research base for evidence-based practices. It is starting to develop. But I think that you're going to see a lot of different approaches coming out. And I always want to err kind of on the side of, things that have a little bit more research behind it. And I don't know what all of those are because I think this is still evolving, but we now are in the business of that. So with our folks, we all know that if you want to change behavior long term, you want to teach replacement behaviors that are as efficient and as effective as the problem behavior. So if the individual has difficulties with self-management or emotional regulation, you want to give them skills that are as efficient and as effective. So the young man that we were working with who had the incredible 5-point scale, and I don't want you to think that that was all that we did with him. He had Asperger's. He had an Asperger's diagnosis at that time. He had a diagnosis of anxiety, ADHD, oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder, bipolar disorder, I think that was it. And he had a lot of things going on. And he had been pulled off of all of his medications by the psychiatrist, which had resulted in him in engaging in very dangerous behaviors at home. And I would encourage, if there's any psychiatrists on this, is, be very cautious with removing individuals from their medications. I jokingly say that if you pull an individual off all their medications, the next words out of your mouth should be, and they can come and live with me for the next month. Because with this individual, when they were pulled off all their medications, they were, they then went home and killed a small farm animal and peed on the dining room table and did a lot of other behaviors. And so there was a point where he had to be hospitalized to get some medication control going, but then gave him strategies really with emotional regulation. And so when we developed that incredible 5-point scale for him, it gave him a strategy that if he got up to 3, he could tell us that he needed to go walk someplace. And he would, or leave the classroom, and he would either go walk and talk at somebody, or he would jump on a trampoline or do something that was exercise. What was not going to work for him is that if an individual, if a staff person walked with him and used that as an opportunity to lecture him, because that was only going to trigger his behavior even more. He had to trust that he was learning a skill, which is good for all of us, is to know when to walk away. You know, and we were trying to teach him how to walk away from a situation that was stressful. So some of the alternative skills that we want to teach individuals include problem-solving skills, choice-making ability, anger management, relaxation strategies with our folks. The Grown Institute out of New Jersey, out of Rhode Island, for years and years worked on self-management strategies and relaxation strategies with individuals on the spectrum. We also want to teach alternative skills around communication for our folks. And, you know, I've working with individuals through the years and working with individuals all on the spectrum. There's been times where I found that for some of our individuals, it's much more helpful for them to be able to journal. And, you know, and many of our individuals are so good with keyboard, but the folks that I worked with, if they can journal for me and kind of communicate what's going on, for some of them, they can put into words much easier if they can communicate them via journaling than telling you what's going on. Social skills, which are incredibly difficult and which can cause our folks to be even more socially isolated. And so, you know, and the reality of it is we all make social faux pas. At least I do in Indiana. We all do, you know. And so understanding that that's just as a reality. Social skills are hard for all of us to learn, and we all learn those social skills, a lot of it by looking at other people's reactions. Well, individuals on the spectrum don't read facial expressions and body language, so they lose a lot of the ways that we actually learn about social skills. And then resilience and grit. And on our website, we have an article about the importance of resilience and grit. And again, that's a theme that I'm hearing a lot during this pandemic, is the importance of having resilience and grit. And just to disclose, not too personal, 16 months ago, I finished my journey with breast cancer. And I tell people in some ways that was kind of a boot camp for this pandemic, because I learned how to socially isolate through that process. And I think it also was a real lesson for me in resilience and grit. And so in some ways, sadly, I've been a little bit more able to kind of deal with all this because of that boot camp that I hope nobody ever has to go through. So, and then emotional and self-regulation are really critical skills for our folks to look at after. So again, you know, I really feel like our job is really to create positive stories about individuals' lives and to really help them with long-term change, you know, not just in the short term. And so when we look at long-term change with individuals, we really want to look at permanent supports that are going to really teach and maintain desired behaviors. And sometimes that is going to be means putting infrastructures around them that support those long-term behaviors. Quality of life improvements are also important, you know, and those include things like health and well-being, increased participation in the community, you know, giving people access to more choice and more control, and then increased and strengthened friendships and connections. And so again, to give you another story about this, several years ago, I was invited to evaluate a residential program in another state. And this was, this group home had been, residential program, group home had been created as a result of this state's efforts in deinstitutionalization. And so they had moved individuals, first of all, from a highly restricted setting, an institutional setting, to a smaller setting that was still pretty large. to then a group home setting. In this intermediate setting, there had been abuse going on with the individuals. And so we were called in, a colleague and I were called in to make sure that the programming was really being done ethically and wonderfully. I will also disclose to you that the individuals were my age, which is the age of Oprah. So you're all thinking, how old is she? I'm a little bit younger. And so it was really a while, because these are individuals who, because of the time that they were born, their family members had been told to put them in an institution and forget that they existed. And so some of the individuals had some pretty incredible skills. They were not all very severely disabled, but at that young age, you know, parents used to be told, get rid of your child and forget that they existed. And so I was spending some time with this one guy who, this is how I measure behavior, is he had a really thick folder of reports. And I sometimes get to see individuals who have whole file cabinets of reports about them, because their history in interacting with professionals is so strong. So he had a lot of behaviors. And as I read through the files, because I would read through the files and then I would go see the person. And when I went to see him, the person that I saw was very different than what was in the file. And I said, so tell me what's going on. And they said, well, come out to the garage and we'll show you. And I'm thinking, okay, what's in that garage? And so they took me out to the garage, and this man was nonverbal, but was delightful, very calm, very kind. And what I saw out there was a kiln. And they had found out that he was really good at doing pottery. And so they had bought a kiln. And then they talked about, in the state they were in, there were pottery classes and communities that did pottery. And at first they were trying to get individuals into those communities, and people were really hesitant because this guy was different. You know, he had a disability and he was nonverbal, and they were concerned and fearful of him. And what they found is that when he was finally able to get in the door, he was so good at making that pottery that people would watch him in awe, and they would kind of model some of the things that he had done. So all they didn't develop another behavior program. All that they did was that they improved his quality of life. It was so stunning to me. And I think with our folks too often, we don't think about how we improve their quality of life overall. So, you know, you may need to identify other supports in your community. And again, those specific supports that your families and individuals need, I don't know what those are. You know, hopefully that your universities and your governments know what those are. And so that you have, I know in Indiana, we have various systems where you can go online and find out services in your area. And I know just, again, I don't know Florida very well, but Indiana has a very large rural area. And I know that sometimes those services are much more difficult in rural areas than they are in urban areas. And we have to kind of stretch to find options for our folks in those areas. I think the other thing that we have to realize is that when individuals engage in their behaviors, that it's not only the person who's going to change. You know, and I think that's the hardest thing, is that, again, we're part of that dance, and how will we change what we do as well. And hopefully it has to develop from information that we've gathered. Again, the idea is to make the problem behaviors less relevant, less efficient, and less effective. And whatever we do with an individual has to be implemented systematically. We have to really think about purposefully teaching individuals. So this is the young man that I was talking about, who was the Big Bang kid. And he, last I heard, I don't know how he's doing now with this pandemic, but last I heard, he was doing really well. And I think he really taught me a lot of lessons. And this was part of my journey in getting into the world of ASD and mental health, is that individuals, all of us, are 24/7, and that we have to know and work with the whole person, you know, and that, you know, as I was working with the staff, I had to tell them, we had to talk about those things that they could vent about, but they didn't have any control over, and know what they had influence over. We also learned from him that he needed a champion, you know. As a matter of fact, when we went into the meeting around him, there was the principal and the director of special ed, psychologists, educators. His family did not show up because of some family dynamics going on. That doesn't mean that there weren't family members that didn't care. It was just family dynamics. And they all sat around and looked at me and wanted to know, what is the behavior plan? What are the consequences that we need to deliver? And one of the things that really resonated with me was that this young man needed a champion. And part of that was I somehow fell upon this approach. And I don't know that there's any research around it, except it's probably around rapport building, which we'll talk about. But as I was watching him, I went up to him and I said, you know, you really are an amazing young man. And I said, I bet people tell you that all the time. And he looked at me in a very deadpan kind of voice. He said, no one ever tells me that. And I have to tell you, I've been told that by other individuals on the spectrum, where all that we've focused on are their deficits. And so they've never heard about their strengths and their wonderful qualities. So I sat down with him and I said, I don't know you very well. I've only met you, but let's make a list of those of your good qualities. And so we made a list and I wrote them down and I said, I want you to put this list in your pocket. And I shared the ideas with his staff and they were going to share with the family. And I said, I want you to read this now and again to remember how wonderful you are. Because again, when we talk about individuals who have mental health issues or ASD, we always focus on the deficits. And I realized for this young man, if I looked at through the years when he did the very best, it was because he had a person who was a champion. Recently, I was on a phone conversation with a woman who has mental health issues, who was pursuing an autism diagnosis. I'm not sure that she does have an autism diagnosis. She has mental health issues and she's has co-occurring substance abuse issues going on as well. And, you know, my comment to her was, you need someone who is in your corner, who is going to help you maneuver through the services, somebody that you can interact with. And I think when I see individuals who have no one, who have nobody who helps them, it becomes much more difficult for them. And I know in some situations, you all probably have become champions for those individuals. I think that every person needs to experience success, child or adult needs to experience success during each day. And I know as an educator and as a boss that I want to make sure that all of my staff feel successful every day. And I've also found that many of the approaches that we've used with individuals on the autism spectrum work with people with mental health issues as well, that there isn't necessarily a different science. And I'll kind of talk through some of those as I go through the handout. So with that said, if you have not seen it, for education at least, there is something called the National Professional Development Center on ASD, National Professional Development Center on ASD, that lists out the evidence-based practices on autism. So develop a program based on strengths and interest. You know, Temple is successful because she has found something that she loves to do and she's very successful with. You know, if I look at my friends on the spectrum who have had successful lives, it's because they figured out something that they can do successfully. Okay. And, you know, what can you do to help that person each day feel successful? Who do they connect most with? And how do we kind of help define and nurture and build on that connections? And during what time of the day are they most successful, so that we can kind of shift that lens away from a deficit model to a strengths-based model. So, you know, again, support, but do not overly support. You know, I have seen individuals who have been supported right out of opportunities. And they have been supported so heavily through the years that their options are limited. I, being a board certified behavior analyst, I obviously interact in the world of ABA quite a bit. And I, once a month, I used to, not now I can't, but once a month I go and spend a day at an ABA center, and then I'm an advisor, you know, during the other days. And one of the things that we are really thoughtful about in the ABA center, and I really appreciate the BCBA who owns this, is that her goal is not to make the children more dependent on them, but is to really kind of deal with their behaviors and help to deal with the neurological medical condition of autism spectrum disorder, and then to get them to the place where they can start learning, and then to gradually transition them back into a general education setting. And she works with that transition and works with the general education community on getting the individual transitioned back. And she realizes that that if we keep people, and there's strong research literature around this for years, that when individuals are in segregated settings, when they are in highly supportive settings like that, they will graduate and they will end up in segregated settings as adults. So we really want to make sure that we help individuals assimilate a little bit more and build that resilience. We also want to make sure that we provide, and individuals are going to be at different stages along. And guys, reality is that we all need a combination sometime. You know, if you told me right now to go out and change my tire, I would have to call somebody. I need a combination for that, like many things. So, like getting my hair done, I need a combination for, by the way. And I think also meaningful work. You know, we've got to give individuals something meaningful to do. And that doesn't mean a job, it means just something that they can do that holds meaning for them. And I think, you know, when I look at the mental health literature, and as I'm looking at the mental health literature around kids in general education settings, one of the things that they talk about, and for adults, and as I look at adults that I've interacted with who have mental health issues, purpose is so important, you know, is that we have to really think about how we give people purpose in life. And you know, in some cases, sometimes their purpose becomes around all the dysfunction in their life. How do we give them meaningful work and meaningful purpose? You know, one of the other things that they talk about with the pandemic is that is really helpful for all of us is go help somebody else, you know. And so I know in my church, one of the things that we're being asked to do is to call others. And I've been asked to call parishioners who have people who have family members on the spectrum. I think we all have to find our purpose through all of this. And in many ways, I'm grateful to be able to do this webinar because there's purpose in it, you know how individuals learn and how they process information the very best and, you know, build upon that. I think we also have to build in choice. And people don't necessarily know how to make good choices. And so, you know, I talk to people about how we teach individuals to make choices and to learn what is a choice and what is not a choice. In all honesty, there's some things that I don't have choice over. You know, I don't have choice about whether I go into the shopping mall right now. Thank God, but not that I have any desire to. But there's things that are just choices that are taken out of our hands, or that may not be choices that we should have. And so we have to help people understand these are the things that you have control over, these things that you have choice, and these are things that you're not. And from a very young age, we should be teaching choice making for children. I think the other thing that really resonates with me is being present. You know, I look at, you know, sometimes it's just being present with folks, you know, engaging with them that is going to be really powerful for them, you know, because, you know, we have actually at Indiana University, we have a club that's called Students on the Spectrum. And the idea is that we want our students who are on the autism spectrum to have a community that they can meet with. I have a social worker who staffs it, and when we're in session, they meet once a week on campus. Obviously, they can't be doing that now. So as we were working with that group, we found that they still needed to connect, and they still needed us to be present. And so we're Zooming with them once a week, and we'll be Zooming with them once a week through the summer, because there's also going to be the process of not only how they left campus, which was very abrupt. They were told that they had to leave within a couple days, but then how do they re-enter into the college climate whenever we open up again? And I will tell you that our president is being really thoughtful about that, and so I'm very blessed to work at this campus. We also have to create a community of support for folks, and you know, I told you that I went through cancer treatment, and my community of support was incredible. And I think that that was part of the resilience that I had, was that I had friends who would cry, mostly laugh with me. We did a lot of laughter. And, you know, friends who shaved my head, and friends who held my hand, and friends who bought me food. And in our life, all of us need that community of support. And so how do we create that community of support around the families and the individuals? One of the things that I see coming out of the mental health community is also realizing that the sensory needs of some of our folks. And so I just kind of have to laugh when, you know, when our folks who are getting into this neuroscience say, well, you know, we have found that the use of fidgets are really helpful. Well, for years, we have been working in programs and talking about universal design and saying fidgets are not always only helpful for individuals on the spectrum, they're helpful for others as well. And the reality of it is, guys, we all have our fidgets. You know, we all have things that we fidget with. And so And we also see people creating calming rooms, areas that individuals can go to, but we see a lot of sensory things being addressed with our folks. And then very purposeful teaching. And again, I would look at the National Professional Development Center for evidence-based practices. And one of the things that is lovely about that website is that they not only give you the research behind the evidence-based practices, but they also give you fidelity implementation checklists. Because people will tell me, oh yeah, we're using visual supports, but then I go into the classroom and I don't see them anywhere. So and then they'll say, well, they're not working. When I see that things are not working, and it's usually for one of three reasons. One is that that person developmentally is not at the place, or it's not a good match for them in terms of their learning style. Two is that it was not tried for long enough. And three was that it was not done with fidelity. It wasn't done the way that research tells us to do it. So visual supports, a lot of our folks are very visual. They depend on those visuals. Again, we have a full catalog of visuals. I'm sure that the university there does as well, but there's lots of stuff out there. Please, we also have on our Facebook page and website, we have an area on COVID so that if individuals are having anxiety about that, we've provided a lot of information for them on that. I think individuals also need to understand expectations, and we use a lot of double meanings and sarcasm and innuendos. And so, for example, we'll say, wait a minute. Well, I have a friend on the spectrum. When I say to her, wait a minute, she knows that she thinks that means 60 seconds. And so through the years, I've had to teach her that wait a minute for me may mean 60 seconds. It may mean 10 seconds, or it may mean an hour. Okay, so those things that we say that are very hard for individuals to understand the clear expectations of, we have to think about how we help to guide them. And again, I think that our folks are always looking for the rules and routines, and those rules and routines, things that are predictable, help them to calm themselves a little bit down. We also do a lot of schedules and graphic organizers. I will tell you, one of my coping strategies through the pandemic is that every day I have a schedule for myself. So that I can see that I'm getting things done and that it can help organize my life. I also clear transitions from one activity or one event to the next. And again, one of the things that we work on is helping people as they transition from one setting to the next. We'll be developing materials for individuals as they transition back into wherever they're transitioning back into as they come out of this pandemic. And then I don't know of anybody who doesn't do best in a calm, safe, and predictable environment. Again, I know that some of our individuals will go and all they know is that chaos of a certain situation. But if I see individuals being very successful, it's because they have that calm environment. We do a lot with brain intervals and movement. And so my young man, one of the things that we built into his program was that we had him teaching yoga to his class. And I've worked with a lot of individuals who, if we build in some movement, and I know in our schools in Indiana, they actually have time for brain breaks or brain intervals, or they have movement breaks. And that's coming around a lot more. And if you look at countries that are really successful with education, they oftentimes have built movement into the day, which is incredible. And I think the other thing that is really important, and if I think about the strategy that is most beneficial for our folks on the spectrum and for our folks with mental health as well, it's the relationship building. It's rapport and relationship building. And that requires a lot of the things that I've talked about, being present, communicating. But I think that when you have that rapport and relationship with the individual, when they trust you, when they trust that you will look out for them, when they trust that you take care of them, then they will be much more successful. You will be able to make a greater impact, and they will be much more successful with you. I know as someone who goes into schools and people will say to me, go work with this child. Well, children don't know me. I don't have any relationship with them. So one of the things that I will do is a lot of times is just spend a little time connecting with the individual. And whatever that means, or with different people, that means different things. And if I can't connect, I know that I look to see who is most connected and what works the best with that person, with the individual. So that connection, feeling that connection, because really making change is about trusting somebody. trusting that somebody has your best interest at heart, trusting that somebody will be there for you, trusting that somebody will support you. And if you don't have that rapport and relationship with them, it's not going to happen. In the literature, they talk about and how we articulate this in kind of in a way that we can operationalize it is that we tell people to make sure that their positive comments outweigh their negative comments. And I've heard ratios of 8-to-1, 6-to-1, 5-to-1, all different kinds of ratio. Whatever the ratio is, we want to make sure that we are being much more positive with individuals than negative. And so instead of telling them all the things they're doing wrong, making sure 8-to-1 or 6-to-1, 5-to-1, that we are telling them, nice job. Or let's do this instead. We're redirecting, using redirection, which is a really helpful strategy. So, that's a strategy that is useful whether you're talking about corporations or schools or in general education, special education. I know I use it with my staff as well. So here are some of the things that I'm still grappling with. We are still grappling with community mental health supports they need. Our community mental health centers have improved greatly. One of the difficulties and what got me into this at first was that our schools or our families would go to community mental health centers, and the community mental health centers could not serve individuals who had co-occurring mental health issues and ASD. And so I took it up the chain to the head of our agencies. And I was told by our community mental health centers that it was related to funding supports. And it was also related to workforce development expertise. And so I think that we have dealt with the funding supports, and I think we're in the process and need to continue to be in the process of dealing with it from the ability of individuals to really serve these folks. And so we've really had to break down those silos. And I think what's difficult is we have actually a state leadership team that as part of the Indiana School Mental Health Initiative. So we've invited the Department of Justice, we've invited the Department of Child Services, Division of Mental Health and Addictions, Department of Education, both special and general education, and many other organizations to kind of think about how we come together as a state and provide services. Because I think, what I see for families and for individuals is that too often we silo things. And it makes it very difficult because individuals are not siloed individuals. They have conditions and situations and needs that cut across these silos. So we're still dealing with that. And it'll be interesting to see how we come out of all of this pandemic and the services that they're looking at funding, and if this will help a little bit. We're still grappling with not enough psychiatrists. I'm happy to say that at the IU School of Medicine that this year the psychiatrist class was filled up, but I know that we don't have enough psychiatrists to train psychiatrists in our state. And so it is, in some areas of our state, it is very hard for folks to find psychiatrists. So we actually have a list of people who diagnose and assess in the state of Indiana. And some of those are individuals who also will provide programs and will also do some medication management as well. So we have a list to kind of help families maneuver through all of that as well. We're still grappling with good crisis options. And our crisis programs get filled up. And I think it's really hard when you think about these crisis options, is that we have some residential programs that bring together the 50 most difficult individuals in the state, and with people who are not well paid, and with people who do not receive a lot of training and expected to make progress. And it's very difficult. We really don't place value on that. And, we have, what I've seen is that like every other state probably, or like many states, we had done away with our mental health programs. Many of them are institutional ones as part of the deinstitutionalization. And now starting to develop some small clinics. And this is not a support for segregated options, but I think that when you have individuals who are killing things or destroying property or causing damage to their families sometimes need support, and individuals sometimes need to go to clinical programs to get some intensive support so that they can kind of turn it around. That should be not a large population, it should be, but still it needs to be there for some of our folks. So one of the things that we have is actually with our folks is in Indiana, we have a list of kind of what the options are in the state of Indiana. We also have really grappled with the need for school social workers and getting folks to take a preventative approach in our schools. So the Indiana School Mental Health Initiative came out of the concern with the need for um, services for individuals who had co-occurring mental health issues and autism spectrum disorders. And I will tell you that when I first started going around places, here's what I heard. Well, we've studied it. We had a survey about it. Well, we had a legislative committee about it. We had admired the problem to death, but there was not a lot going on. And so we got some money from special ed to start doing something. And so, but it came out of the school special ed. And so the work was predominantly in the schools. So that's why we called it the Indiana School Mental Health Initiative. I then hired somebody who was on the general education side, who then started working with the state superintendent and her office on looking at social emotional learning competencies. And we've worked with CASEL and the National Center on School Mental Health to look at how we create cultures and environments in schools that address the emotional well-being of our students. And so we kind of have had two separate kind of approaches or things that we've focused on. The issue with our kids who have co-occurring mental health issues and autism, and we have behavior consultants and training and all kinds of things that we've done, and then looking at social emotional learning. And so we've also looked at policy, and one of the things that we've grappled with in terms of policy is that in policy, most of our policymakers are really interested in crisis management, in doing things very reactively instead of proactively. So we're really having to work with our schools to take a more proactive approach. And so within that, we've identified the mental health worker, the SEL coach in every one of our schools, and we connect them with each other so that we're not recreating the wheel and that we can kind of help people build upon the very best. Right now, we're working as a team to develop some materials as students get ready to leave school, as they go through the school year, as they go through the summer, and then as they re-enter into the schools. And so, we're really trying to take that preventative and proactive approach with our folks as well. And still, there's a lot of need, and still our rural communities struggle, and some of them are doing better. Still, we deal with a problem of meth in the state of Indiana. Still, we deal with a lot of other issues and crises in our state, so like every state. And so this is not a problem that's going to go away. And I know that people will say to me, you're focused on school years. What about the drug issue in Bloomington? And I think what I've just learned is that I have to I can make the impact that I can make, and that I can, the schools are someplace where kids are. And so if we can make a difference in schools, then maybe that will help prepare kids to deal with their mental health issues early on. So, but the little money that we get does not afford us the ability to deal with larger community crises. So the other part of this is that we are part of this dance, and so we have to assess kind of what our hot buttons are, realize what we bring to the table. There are things that I can tolerate depending on the day and state of mind. There are things that I have a hard time tolerating at any time. I will tell you that I do much better with an individual who throws something at me than an individual who whines at me. Whining for me is a behavior that just gets under my skin, And my grandchildren know that whining is not a good thing to do around me. It hits my hot buttons, But I know that. And obviously, I know that I have to calm myself when whining occurs. And so realize what we all bring to the table in terms of our own stress and our own demands and our own issues that we're dealing with, and our ability to be consistent and to approach things objectively. And, within that, we've got to make sure that we take better care of ourselves, and think about what we have control over in our lives. In this situation, We have to think about what we can do to help ourselves and look at what our own ACE score is, and what's impacted our life, and to acknowledge that trauma that we may have that causes us to react to some. I will be honest with you, there are some people I can connect with really easily, and a small group of folks that I just know that I have to say to another staff member, you really would be a better fit for this person. And it took a lot of years for me to give myself the room to say that, and give myself permission to say that, to realize that not all of us are going to get along with everyone, and how do we acknowledge who we get along with. So there is also something that's very real about compassion fatigue. In addition to Zoom fatigue, there is compassion fatigue. And so when you're always in that caretaking profession, you are going to develop fatigue. And we talk about it as secondary trauma with our folks, is that they're going to be going through secondary trauma. It is very hard, and I will tell you, having done this for a lot of years, I probably have developed some strategies that help me, but there are times that I will go home from a really hard situation, especially when I see an individual who is being sexually or physically abused, and I have to get with friends or with family members that will help me deal with it, because it is hard. And I think we have to acknowledge that, is that what we are doing by its very nature sometimes is very difficult. We know, and again, what we're hearing through this pandemic is that exercise is really critical. However you exercise, Pilates or walking or going to, you can't go to the health club now, but I lift weights at home and I walk and I do online Pilates now to help me. Healthy eating is also important. Meditation, breathing exercises. Brene Brown talks about a breathing exercise where she says, breathe in at the count of 4, hold your breath, and then breathe out for a count of 4, and then hold that breath. So your stomach is extended when you breathe in and distended when you breathe out. So, use breathing or meditation, take some quiet time. Again, I know that I cannot listen to the news 24/7. I have limited my news watching to only a few minutes. I think connecting socially with family and friends, my family does a Zoom a happy hour every Saturday night. And I've got family members all over the country, and I have a group of friends that are supportive, and we Zoom with each other and we connect. But I think know where your support comes from, and you have to balance home life and work life. And I will tell you, I'm struggling with that, with working at home, is knowing the difference between the two. But I think that we really have to I have to establish some boundaries. I think I also need to be around positive people. I have a tendency to want to be around people, and I really believe that laughing every day is healing for all of us. And also establishing our own routines and setting goals for each day can help you also with your own self-care. So one final comment, and then again, I wish that that if you have questions, that you will email me. Some of you may still have questions as a result of this. I'm sure that I've not answered all your questions. I know that I had a question about, I've said in the notice that I'm not going to talk about medications because I'm not a doctor. And I always am interested in doctors now talking about educational programming. So I honor that credo, that I don't talk about their domain and they shouldn't talk about mine. So I'm not going to talk about medication. We do interact with more and more individuals who are going through or have gender identity issues. And interestingly, we have individuals on the spectrum who have other family members who also have gender identity issues as well. There's an advocate just recently who died who had an unidentified gender. And so we see that in the field of autism at times. And again, I don't know that it's that different dealing with that for our individuals as it is if they didn't have an autism spectrum disorder. I think how we explain and how we interact is going to be maybe different, but then understanding how that individual understands the world, how they interpret the world. And I think that for all individuals, having that champion in their corner that they can go to and talk things through. Folks here know that we have an open door. If they need to talk about anything, we're here for them. Because I think that people need to know that they're going to be heard. And I think that's the most important thing that we all do, is listen to people and make sure that they are feeling heard. So with that said, I want to thank you for all that you do. I feel very blessed to do what I do, and I hope that you all stay well and wash your hands. Thank you.